is intimidating to introduce a scholar whom I have befriended as a colleague and a friend for the past 45 years. Professor Winston Langley does not require any formal introduction, other than letting the audience know, among numerous things that he has accomplished, which is a compilation of 15 highly rated books in the academic arena, 2 books of which he is internationally known for. The Abolition of War is one, and 11 ideas published by our very own, the premier publisher of Africa books, Kasahun Chakole, of the African Red Press. I could say considerably more about Professor Langley, but among other things, he has also served as a provost and vice chancellor at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. I am honored to be sitting right next to him to learn from his impeccable wisdom. He is particularly known for his tireless, courageous work on human rights globally. Welcome to this Adwa session, with which I look forward to celebrate.
I was going to say that I perhaps have very little to say after listening to Lucy and Betty about the meaning of war. My friend, Professor Kures, exaggerates my merits, and he hasn't said very much about himself. But I will venture to suggest that you may want to have an engagement with him, because he's not only a philosopher, but one whose current focus is to uproot, very much like Menelik, an orientation that has undergirded Western philosophy. He is an Adwan.
Well, Professor Langley, as you know, in spite of the titanic presence among civilizational interventions that disrupted the seamlessly self-congratulatory attempts on the part of the West to be a sustained history of triumph and victory, Adwa pierced very deeply a disruption of a continuous European history of imperial presence through the valor, commitment, courage, discipline, and spiritual presence of my Ethiopian ancestors. And yet, in the annals of European diplomatic history, this titanic presence is never mentioned. I wonder why.
If you would permit me to say that I was born in Jamaica, where a group of Rastafarians introduced me to Adwa. My parents did not. Neither did any of the leaders in the British administered colleges and universities. And there is a good reason for that, I think. Adwa was not only the defeat of Italy, although it was the defeat of Italy. It was not only the setting of some boundaries on European imperialism. It did set some boundaries, at least for a while. It was not only that the psychology of European culture, which had claimed for itself a superior standing in all of human history, and had assigned to Africa the lowest level of cultural development. It was that this psychological outlook and orientation had been totally disrupted. And in that rupture, sent a message far and wide. I was in Japan in 2013, and I was mistaken for an Ethiopian. The professor there said that the 1905 victory of Japan over Russia really took part of its inspiration from Adwa. Now, I don't know if you remember that battle. The Japanese, very much as Menelik II did, destroyed the fleet of the Russians and disenabled them from continuing the war. A total defeat. It was Adwa, is mentioned. It is also the case that Adwa must be seen in a broader context. In the context of resistance. We're talking about diplomatic history. And that history seeks to focus on what we may call treaties, negotiations. I noticed the historian whom we listened to very carefully referred to the negotiations of 1889, and I might say something about it. Yes. It also has to do with military strategy, alliances, disalliances, and of course, wars. Diplomatic history was seen as high culture, part of high culture. And those people who went into this area were dealing with high culture. Low culture dealt with how you fed people, or if they had housing, or whether they had health care, etc. Well, in 1889, part of what was happening is that Menelik was implementing what we call strategy in diplomatic history. The Italians wanted him to have become a protectorate of Italy, meaning coming under the protection of Italy, therefore limiting what it is that Ethiopia could do. It is the equivalent today, in today's diplomatic history, of something called cooperation, in which the cooperators are not co-equals at all. Menelik said, no, we are not interested in that position. We think Egypt is becoming a protectorate of Britain, and we are not interested in that. But he understood that Italy was not going away. And so he began to plan for 1896. Don't forget, please, in 1893, the US had taken over Hawaii under the guise of protectorate. Do not forget either that 1885 was the Berlin Conference that ratified European disruption of everything that had any integrity left in Africa. So, if I come back to what Adwa means, it was not only that psychological and historical rupture, but it said that the heart of resistance lies not only in hope, but in strategy.
And now the final question, considering the fact that I have been allotted, I think, about 20 minutes, so I want to adhere to strictures. In terms of thinking about the past and sedimenting ourselves in the present, and also projecting towards the future, let's personalize, if you can, what Adwa means to you. What does Adwa mean to you?
First and foremost, it means, and I'm happy to see all of the children and young people here, it means stories and narratives. The construction of stories and narratives so that they become a part of us. Secondly, it means a focus on the concept of the silence of the good. That which has been good in modern history has never taken off in the dramatic spheres of conventional life. It has had to work its way through the character of individuals and groups. And in that way, we must think of Adwa as operating in that relative silence. Thirdly, there is something in social history that has been called the poetry of hope. Percy B. Shelley, in his poem Prometheus Unbound, and if you recall, in Prometheus, he was condemned by the gods for having revealed to human beings the capacity to invent and to hope. And in that poem, Shelley asks us to think about the very nature of hope. And he speaks of it in terms of seeking from within its own wreck the thing it contemplates. I think Menelik was prepared for that wreck in order to achieve the thing he contemplated. And the fourth would be a cultural feature we call civilization. And you know all about it in Kemet philosophy, Kemetic philosophy. Namely, Menelik was not involved just in a preservation of a state called Ethiopia. He was involved in a civilizational protection. In the ethics, in the history, in the politics, in the economics of Kemetic culture. 5,000 and more years ago. That is Adwa.
And now my final question, a tribute to Betty and Lucy. What would you like to say to these young women who treated us to an elegant narrative with vision, intelligence, and to quote you directly, hope? What are some of the strategic advices that you'd like to render to them?
I say this from, I've done some work in the area of women's rights, and I speak in that vein. Adwa was not simply an expression of the work of men. You remember the work of the Empress. The historical disablement of women under patriarchy is something that is to be found in every society. And if we want to think in terms of the many modes in which inequality survives, we want to begin our studies in this area. What I would say to these two young women as representatives of women generally is just to remember that as part of their history, in this country, for example, in 1848, at the Seneca Falls Conference, women, it's a conference called by women to discuss their right to vote. They gathered at Seneca Falls and they could not chair the meeting. Nobody prevented them from chairing it, but they did not feel that they could chair in public their own meeting. And do you know who chaired it? A slave who had escaped, an escaped slave. In other words, the public space was allowable even to slaves, not to women. So what I would say, please be intimately acquainted with the 1979 International Convention on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. And make that a textual expression for our collective future.
Thank you so much. I particularly want to thank these attentive audience, a feature of civilized Ethiopianity. Thank you so much. Great. Thank you. I hope I did not.
You did good. They did amazing again for Professor Kiros and Professor Langley. We really appreciate you.
ውዲቷን እናት አገር ለኛ ምትክ የሌለሽ ካይምሮ አይጠፋም ያንቺ ትዝታሽ